Good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from around the world. My name is Meg Regan. I'm a Senior Director for Executive Education and a lecturer in Work and Organization Studies here at MIT Sloan. It's my pleasure to welcome you to a rapid start approach to building organizational resilience and to wish you all a happy Valentine's Day. I guess it's fitting that we're about to discuss risk and resilience on this day, as both come into play with matters of the heart as well as in business. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our faculty guests. Retsef Levi. Retsef is a professor of operations management at MIT and faculty co-director of the MIT Leaders for Global Operations program. And John Carrier. John is senior lecturer of system dynamics here at MIT. And both John and Retsef teach in our custom programs for executives, as well as our open enrollment program for executives titled Building Organizational Resilience, a system approach to mitigating risk and uncertainty. Welcome, John and Retsef. Thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Meg. It's great to be here.
Great, welcome. Well, let's kick off the conversation. I'd like to start with the fact that there are no shortage of examples in the news that remind us as leaders that the absence of organizational resilience can have debilitating consequences. Yet the instances of system-level collapses persist. This is, suggesting to me a widespread knowing-doing gap with regard to resilience building and risk mitigation. So let's start off with the definition of resilience and then some insights on what's going on at a high level. Why are we seeing so many major failures in building resilience and mitigating risk?
Yeah.
Great.
I can
go ahead. Want to kick us off, Retsef?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So I just want to start off with a.
Is this me only? Or?
Oh, it looks like John. John is frozen.
Okay. I'm a control systems engineer, and it's really about disturbance reduction. How long does it take your system to return to its initial state when an unexpected shock occurs? Right. That would be a definition of resilience we've been using for, in control systems for about 100 years. And I would say the reason why we're seeing so many events in company collapses and lack of resilience today is I compare the analogy to, like, let's say we have a boat and that boat gains water, right, in the bottom. You don't have to really worry about it until you're just about to sink. That's when the system starts to go unstable. And look what's been happening in the economy. Like, there's stress on companies, i.e. on revenues, on profit systems until they see the symptom. So I think it's this added pressure of the external market plus stripping away employees and systems that provided that resilience and financial knowledge to companies. So I'd say that's a real strong reason why we're seeing so many events today.
Maybe I can.
Yeah, Retsef,
yeah. So the way I'm thinking about resilience, and there are different levels of resilience, right? So, but maybe the one that is the hardest for companies and organizations to manage. I think it has to do with the fundamental understanding of what I would call the enabling conditions or the boundaries, the operating boundaries of your system. I actually believe that most, and at least many organizations operate on a regular basis without having the awareness of what are the boundaries of their system, what are the enabling conditions that allow them to operate as regular as possible. And I'm going to maybe give the most maybe kind of trivial but maybe non-trivial example. So let's just think about a hospital and doing surgeries. Having surgical gloves and having masks and having gowns is really an enabling supply that without it, you cannot do surgeries. I think, though, that if you ask hospitals, at least up to 3 years ago, what are the things that are important to them? I think that very few people would really think actively that this is an enabling supply. So this is what is tricky about this concept. What is tricky about this concept is that often the very small things, maybe the cheapest supply that you take for granted, can be an enabling or a boundary condition of your system, and once it's violated, your system is not going to be able to operate. So what resilience is, to me, resilience has to do with the awareness of the company to what its boundaries are, what are the enabling conditions, operating enabling conditions that it has, and then the ability to actively and continuously monitor how these boundaries change over time, because these boundaries are actually not static, right? And how close you are to the boundary is changing over time. So for example, let's just take another example. Sometimes for an organization, knowledge that people have in the organization is an enabling condition, and sometimes you're just one departure away from losing major capability to operate as usual, and that's something, again, that most companies may not have awareness to, and may not have the continuous ability to actually monitor that and then react, right? And then have the plan of what are they going to do when these conditions are violated, are suddenly not holding true anymore. So to me, resilience is about what a company does when one or more of these enabling conditions are violated. And my way to illustrate that is taken from boxing. Mike Tyson was one of the most talented and successful boxers in the history of boxing, also a problematic person, but he was once told that his opponent claims that he has a plan how to fight him, and Mike Tyson's reaction was, everybody has a plan until they get punched on the mouth. So to me, resilience is at the moment where your company is punched on the mouth, how well you can recover, how prepared you are to that moment.
And Retsef said something extremely important that overlaps with my world. I do a lot of continuous improvement, and so much of it seems boring. Companies talk about it, but no one likes to do it. But to do good continuous improvement, you're implicitly redefining your company's boundaries all the time. Should this be in our system or not? And when you take away those little continuous improvement functions, you lose control of your boundaries, and you open yourself up to this risk. So there's a really strong tie between how Retsef does, is a foundational addressing risk, and my original focus was looking at productivity. And one of the things we'll get talking to as part of our discussion is how important productivity and risk both.
Okay. Thanks. So it sounds like it's surfacing information within the company and utilizing that information in a timely manner to make decisions or make changes, and help to react in a timely manner and start to exercise that resilience when you need to, if you're punched in the mouth, as Retsef says. So let's think about something that was in the news here in the United States, at least recently, and that's the recent Southwest Airlines collapse. So for those of you who may not have heard about this was a major failure of an airline here in the United States that left people stranded around the holidays all over, and it's had a really negative impact for the reputation of the company and financially as well. And it was really all over the news because people were literally missing holidays and stranded and not able to get home for sometimes days or weeks. So this kind of thing, people saying, oh, this is a perfect storm. No one could have predicted this failure for Southwest Airlines. And just to mention, even last year, Southwest Airlines was received awards for best employer in America. Everything seemed to be going really well from them. And then in late 2022, this collapse happened. So, was it really unpredictable? Was it just a perfect storm? Or were there signs? Were there things that Southwest could have picked up on? And what can companies do to proactively address these kind of seemingly unpredictable events?
Yeah. So I can start addressing this. So going back to by the way, the history repeats itself, and you mentioned Valentine's Day. So actually, quite some time ago on Valentine's Day, JetBlue had not exactly the same failure, but the major failure where many of their planes in JFK were stuck on the tarmac for hours because of a snowstorm that became an ice storm. And then the following week, they had to cancel 40% of their flights, and that almost brought the company down. And again, what is interesting that JetBlue was, like Southwest, was considered best in class, a very successful company. And this goes to some interesting aspects that relate to resilience. So the first concept that I would like again to underscore is, in order to be able to detect that you have signals that you are about to essentially be disrupted, essentially when your regular operations are going to be disrupted and you need to operate under irregular operations, in order to be able to detect the signals, it's not just enough to have sensors. I think that often companies think that, we need to monitor something, so we're going to create a lot of IT systems, a lot of sensors, we're going to collect a lot of data, and that's going to solve our problem. You need to have, first and foremost, you need to have an enterprise level model of what the boundaries are and how to interpret the signals that you collect. Because without that, you're not going to be able to really understand what is coming at you, because the environment is so noisy. The other thing that you need to have is it has to connect to a set of processes that will trigger actions. So getting signals and understanding what they mean to you, but not doing anything about this, that's also not going to be very useful to you. And then the last thing that you need to do, you need to fundamentally design your system to have enough flexibility and enough resilience in the design that will allow you to weather the storm of irregular operations. And here is something that is actually a very interesting trade-off, because sometimes the things that are going to make you very, very successful in steady state are going to be the one or the very same things that are going to actually hunt you down when you are under irregular operations. So maybe the most obvious aspect of that, well, all companies are all for efficiency, right? And often efficiency means that you cut and cut and cut, and you make yourself very thin, or you refrain from investing in new IT technology, or you let your system degrade, and you are not very proactive on keeping up your capabilities. And that makes you more profitable, and it looks great, right? You might want, from customer service perspective, to drive high utilization and make sure that you push through as many flights as possible under all conditions. That's become part of your culture. All of these things can make you very, very successful in steady state, where everything works according to the plan or within the enabling conditions of your system. But once you suddenly get disrupted, that's going to come and hunt you. So one of the things that people have to think within companies, managers have to think about, is the trade-off between being successful in steady state and how do you maintain resilience to those not frequent but still happening occasions where you are under irregular operations and you are completely disrupted.
Mm-hmm. And whose job is it to make those decisions? I mean, we can think about delayed maintenance kind of in maybe a manufacturing type setting, or we can think about technological debt in a variety of settings. I mean, there's pressures, right, that leaders are facing around the efficiency that you mentioned, Retsef, around profits and that sort of thing. Like, whose decision is it to make the call on this, and how do they do it?
And maybe I'll connect to Retsef. Is the first question you get is, what's the return on investment, right? And I want y'all to know, you all have ROIs in your own life that are negative. think of your car insurance. The return on your car insurance is negative. And so anytime we get into our that we're losing resilience for profits. And just you said back to Southwest, there was a recent survey with their employees, but what they wanted, the number one thing they wanted was better salary. And the second one was they wanted the computer systems fixed, some of those which contributed to the disaster. So someone always knows, and then someone makes a decision, oh, maybe we could defer it a little bit longer. And then that gets into this, basically this cycle of, since it didn't happen this period, we can get away with it again until you can't. And very similar to the way Retsef talked about allowing these things to persist within your system boundaries. And only leadership's responsible for that ultimately.
And sometimes, by the way, I always tell people, good companies, good organizations with talented people often can find solutions to some more minor disruptions, and it's almost happened, near misses, and the more you are successful to manage them, the more complacent you become, because you sometimes my joke is like being successful and not failing small is sometimes your most it's a curse, because it makes you now believe that it's okay, things are okay, but unless you have a model that basically tells you, oh, this was just luck and we were able to get out of this hole, but that's could easily could have gone the other way, unless you have that mentality in your company. And that has to do with the fundamental culture about how you think about decision making under uncertainty and how you interpret signals, and that's absolutely something that has to be driven by managers, and I would even say that has to start from the C-level. This is not something that's going to emerge from the front lines, because they are being driven by the boundaries and by the questions being asked by the senior leaders in the organization. And if all the questions are only about steady states, and nobody stops to ask the questions about risk, resilience, what is going to happen, what are the disruptions that we should worry about, how we dynamically think about indicators that will tell us whether our boundaries are changing in a way that is risky to us. These are questions that only managers that have the broader perspective can and should and absolutely must ask in order to create a culture and an organizational capability of resilience.
So, as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about one of our colleagues at MIT, Otto Scharmer, who often says that most leadership failures arise out of a lack of listening. So a real disconnect between leadership and what's going on at the front lines. So what do you think is getting in the way of leaders being able to hear or know what are these challenges that are happening on the front line? When are the boundaries being violated? When are these workarounds happening that are dangerous? How can leaders get that information to do what they need to do and make the right decisions for the company?
So let me just start off. So one of the major ways we prevent accidents is not that they're not initiated, but we step in and prevent their propagation. So what that means is leading indicators are really important, right? But here's the problem. I love the fact Retsef mentioned a near miss. Now, a near miss is a leading indicator that a future event could happen. But if I cause the near miss, so I'm not necessarily going to share that information. So the point is, as a leader, if you want to get bad news is a leading indicator. If you punish people for it, it's a lagging indicator and you won't see it. So it's really important that if you're not hearing bad news from your organization, you're allowing it to build up in your system.
Yeah, I really want to underscore, I think, something you've said, Meg, which I've actually analyzed many risk management system failures, and in fact, in my past, I spent almost 12 years in the Israeli military as an intelligence officer, and for the intelligence in Israel, the Yom Kippur War was a major risk management collapse, where we were surprised by Egypt and Syria, and 3,000 people died in the war, and Israel was basically on the brink of not existing anymore. So that's a kind of a traumatic event. But in this event, in every event that I've analyzed, there were people in the system that knew it is coming, and the system failed to listen to them in a timely manner. And to me, again, that goes back to what questions manager ask, because they're going to get answers that are highly dependent on the kind of questions that they ask. And then the second thing is, it's really about what are the decision processes that we have in a company. I think that most companies don't really invest in having structured decision processes. They have a lot of processes that tell people how to do things. They have not as nearly as many. In fact, most companies may have zero processes that define how you make decisions, how you discuss things, how do you plan your discussions to maximize the chances that all the relevant information is being brought to the table. And part of it, and here I'm connecting to what John talked about, is the notion of processes to debrief and really make debriefing both near misses, failures, but also successes is absolutely critical set of processes and a capability of an organization to create resilience and really avoid this surprise that you wake up one day to something that you completely did not anticipate. Again, and maybe the example I would give from my past experience in the military, I was in the area of special operations. These are high-risk activities, and really an organization that operated in very high level of success rates. And after every operations, we had 2 or 3 days where everybody was brought to one room for several days, and everybody that was involved in preparing and executing the operation stood up and talked about what was planned, what went wrong, what can we learn from that. And the funny thing, the irony is that the 4-star general, the head of the intelligence wings, one time he came to the meeting and he didn't have this culture. So his immediate reaction was, if I knew, after he heard all of the debriefing that was very pointed, after success, by the way, right? But he stood up and said, hey, if I knew how unprepared you are, I would never approve this activity. And he failed to, and we needed to explain to him that actually what he sees in front of his eyes is actually the very reason why he should have approved the activity, because that's why we are able to maintain such a high success rate in very, very complicated and high risk activities, because of the debriefing culture of scrutinizing everything that you do and trying to learn and get better and identify the weak points that you have, and not necessarily wait for the failure to investigate what happened.
That makes me think of something we say here at MIT a lot is nobody gets rewarded for solving the problem that didn't happen, right? And it takes time to be thinking about those things all the time and having those discussions. But the fact is, it's time very well spent. And it's what can get cut out when people are trying to work faster and not smarter.
So speaking about safety, it's actually interesting, as you said, exactly. Like if things are safe, nothing happens, right? So people may think, oh, you're not doing anything, and that's why I often tell people that in order to be safe, you need to look unsafe. What do I mean by that? Safe or not safe is often a result of subjective definitions that we have of what counts as something went wrong, right? And we can put the threshold in different levels, right? If we put the threshold high enough, we're going to be safe, because all the things that happen below the threshold, we will never count them as a problem. My suggestion is take the threshold low, look less safe, look more unsafe, because you're going to have all of these things popping up. But that's going to make you safer, because now you actually consider them as a problem. You investigate, you debrief, you learn, and you get better. That's kind of how you manage risk, by actually being very, very sensitive to what you consider a problem. Like if you have a very high threshold, you might look good on the reporting scheme, but you're not going to be getting better. It's better to look worse on the reporting scheme and better in practice, because that allows you to actually identify all the problems in advance.
And I would just add, I work in a lot of high hazard industries with maintenance crews. The worst thing you can tell your staff is to cut costs, because then they'll start reusing gaskets, not changing oils at the right frequency, and using spare parts from other spare equipment that you're going to need later. Then when the emergency strikes, the system you actually have is not what you thought you had on paper. And that's what really leads to disaster. So one thing I would like to encourage as leaders, you tell people, let's reduce waste, not cut costs. Those are two very different things. And be very careful of the message you send, especially during these times when you're trying to preserve profit margin.
Great. Thanks. So, let me see. We're talking a lot about the people aspects, right? The culture, the empowerment, and thinking about how important that is, right? To surfacing things early, to having people feel courageous to speak up,
they actually they don't need to, hopefully they don't need courage to speak up. They need to feel confident and comfortable to speak up, right? Because if they need courage to speak up, maybe you have a problem already.
Exactly. Thank you. That's a great point. And so being someone that always likes to think about the organization and the people side of things, I think it's an important conversation. I also want us to spend a little time on technology, though. So, are there ways that technology can be helpful to us in these processes and in helping us kind of get some sense of what's going on in the system?
Yeah. John, you want to take
So I'll start. So first I want to start out, Meg, with when you talk about the organization, think about the battle between operations and maintenance when the financial group wants an extra week of production for that quarter, right? They'll say, can you defer maintenance? Operations, if they run for an extra week, you're going to get a week's more profit. But if you defer maintenance for a week, 99% of the time, it's going to be okay, right? And the maintenance teams previously had no data to say, guys, we really do need to fix this now. So what's really happened today, the nervous system, i.e. in terms of sensors, temperature sensors, pressure, and primarily like vibration and thermography, I, as a maintenance leader, need to stop and fix this now. So therefore, I think it's a new tool in maintenance arsenals to make stronger, clear arguments about how and when maintenance gets done. And I think that is a huge improvement if used correctly.
So as someone that works quite a lot with data analytics and sensors in different settings of high-risk operations, I think that the two thoughts that I want to share is that I think that technology has a great promise, but I think that often it's being misused. And let me explain how I think it's being misused. I think that often people think about technology as a tool to automate existing processes, or expedite them or enhance them, right? The problem is that if the quality of your processes is problematic to start with, automating it and using sophisticated technology will only generate bad outcomes faster, right? But the other thing that is even more related to risk, I think that one of the things that you need to think about technology as a way to simplify the processes and systems in your organization and not to make them more complex. And I think when you look on many projects that involve technology, unfortunately, they end up with more complex systems and processes. And by definition, more complex systems and processes have higher risk of failure. And maybe maybe kind of the best example that I'm sure will resonate with a lot of the people that are hopefully listening to us is IT projects. When people tell me that they have an IT project in their organization, I get very itchy, because I'm asking myself, what is an IT project? To me, there are projects to improve body of processes, a system, and that's the project. And the IT is the enabler to make this system simpler. Better is equals simpler. And I don't think that people are typically thinking about this. And maybe the second thought related to that is that, again, technology is not replacing the need, or it does not waive the need to understand very deeply and design very strategically how humans are going to interact with all of these technological sensors, technical systems. Because at the end of the day, I mean, unless you are in very specific situations when you eliminate humans from the loop completely, right? That can happen, but more often than not, it doesn't happen. Humans are still involved. If you think about healthcare, if you think about aviation, if you think about manufacturing. So now you have to ask yourself how humans are going to interact with technology and what are the risk envelope of this interaction. Because this interaction, this interface is a double-edged sword for you, right? Because it can be something instrumentally beneficial, but at the same time, it could be something that can generate new risks that you didn't even think about. And I don't think that companies often pay enough attention to the two aspects I just mentioned.
And it just reminds me, one of my current colleagues and students I'm working with, a very advanced company, just put new electronic dashboards throughout their whole company in their manufacturing facility. And everything they were measuring were financial metrics, right? So they took what they already measured and knew, put that in the dashboard, and actually made everyone's job much more difficult at best, and also started to introduce bad behavior through pushing financial metrics versus operational. So if you can't just drop a point solution in for technology like Retsef says and expect things to get better. You have to think of the system effects that technology will have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what I'm hearing you both say is that, we want technology to enhance the employee experience and not make it more difficult, for employees to do their job, to do the right thing. I think oftentimes, when we think of the using new technologies, it can also be focused more on customers and customer experience, but we need to be thinking about our employees as well, because their experience influences the customer experience, and also in instances that we're talking about safety, right? Safety concerns and other things like that. Well, what about when we're talking about, technology and opportunities and threats, what about cybersecurity? I think, cybersecurity is a risk that's on a lot of our minds, in the current environment. How do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, as someone that was as a practitioner in the military, working a lot in this area of cybersecurity, and then later on as an academic, I think that the two thoughts that I want to share about this domain is the first of which is that I think that often companies and enterprises think about it as a technical risk, for which the solutions are technological. And they then hand it over to the IT folks, the CIO, and sort of tell them, hey, you buy the best firewalls, buy the best, package, make sure that all your software is updated, and so forth and so forth. And I'm not saying that that's not important, but that's to me actually missing the essence of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is, to me, is exactly about an important aspect of resilience and what I call irregular operations risk. A cyber attack, a data breach because of cyber attack could be taking away some of your most significant enabling conditions that allow you to operate regularly. And and if you understand that, then you understand that the solution cannot be technical. It has to be it has to involve processes, it has to involve people, and it also has to really think about more holistically your supply chain partners. Because when you think about disruptions to your system, they don't only stem from your own enterprise, they also stem from the interfaces that your organization has with your suppliers. Now, when we look on when we think about regular supply chain, the traditional supply chain, the best in class companies are now monitoring and understanding what is happening 4 levels down in their supply chain. So companies like Cisco, companies like Amazon, Walmart, they understand their supply chains, 4 or 5 levels down or up. The same does not happen at the moment when it comes to your digital supply chains. So many companies, they acquire more and more digital services that can be software or hardware or combination of the two. And but they don't know, other than their immediate supplier, they don't know what is happening down up the supply chains. Who are what packages that person that supplier is using, who is developing them. So they are very vulnerable, and in fact, third-party attacks is becoming an increasingly the more frequent mode of attack. So if we think about recent incidents like SolarWind was a story where a software provider was compromised in one of their software updates. We suspect the Russians, but who knows, put a backdoor in their software update, and then they update their software to all their customers, and hundreds of organizations were suddenly compromised, including many governmental agencies in the US. So to me, if we want to think correctly about cybersecurity risk and manage it in the company, we cannot just look within our own enterprise. We have to actually really think about it as, okay, what are our operations and how they're being enabled now by digital services, digital products, digital technologies, and what does it mean to the risk, and what indicators we need to monitor? How do we actually get transparency into our digital supply chain, just as is important to actually get the transparency to our physical supply chain? We need to get to the same level of maturity if we want to go to the next level of managing cybersecurity risk.
And great. I'll just add to Retsef says working with someone in chemical plants and manufacturing where there's this drive to move all the control systems up into the web. 1, don't do that. 2, a cybersecurity breach will happen, so you better make friends with those people before it happens, because it's like the fire department. You need to know them before the fire's in your house. And 3rd, minimize all the data you collect, because I never let my companies, they all want to add new equipment, and I'm like, well, who's going to take care of that, and who's going to understand how to run it? And they realize, oh, we can't do that. So time in simulating a disaster, right, or a break, right? And of course that's an investment, because people got to stop working for half a day. But simulate the problem and get everyone to understand, 1, the severity, what's possible, and also starting what actions do they need to take and recognize, and that will start building resilience.
Okay.
Yeah, if I can pick up on the point that John just mentioned and just generalize it, I think that if you listen carefully to what John said, it really highlights the need for organizations to really practice these issues. This is not, resilience is not about the things that happen to you every day. So it's about the things that don't happen to you every day, that actually happen to you, are going to maybe never happen to you, or are very infrequent. Otherwise, it's going to be part of your regular day-to-day ability to manage risk. And every company has that kind of ability, depending on what they are facing. So if that's infrequent and you want to be ready, you're not going to be ready unless you practice, because you're not going to see this too often naturally. So you have to simulate, do dry runs, and really learn by practicing, by training. I think that this is an extremely important point that John just brought up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just thinking about the fact that, simulations involve individuals and departments from throughout a system, right? They're not happening in a vacuum. And I'm just thinking back to kind of what you were saying, Retsef, about, um, you know, it's not just the IT folks or the CIO's job to be thinking about cybersecurity or threats that are there. It's the leaders, other leaders' job, and folks throughout the organization kind of understanding those risks and what their jobs are to mitigate them.
In fact, I would personally not. I would not give the IT to lead the coordination of that across the enterprise. I think it has to be coordinated by the business and operations people, because that's what is the first thing that is being threatened by cyber attack is your ability to operate and your ability to keep your promise to your customers. So the people that are under threat here are the people that operate and the business people. These are the people that have to coordinate that risk. They need to own that, because that's something that is going to directly affect them. And it's not just about technical capabilities. Many attacks occur because someone clicked the wrong link or lost a laptop, or through a supplier that was not validated, right? So this is not something that IT people, they definitely need to be part of your approach. So that's kind of one thing. And the second thing is that you need to really adapt a multi-layer approach that doesn't really focus only on trying to prevent attacks. So I can tell you, someone that was developing attack capabilities back when I was a little bit younger, about 30 years younger or 40 years younger, 30 years younger, I can tell you that there is no system that you cannot break. But the things that will make the biggest difference, and when you look on attack incidents, there is a striking statistics that on average, companies, it takes them about 6 months before they even realize that they were attacked. So I would make the argument that if you detect an attack after 2 weeks versus after 6 months, you're going to have very, very, very different consequences, extremely different consequences. So you really want to have and build not only capability to prevent attacks, but equally important, even more important, the capabilities to detect attacks fast and contain them, right? And I don't think that most companies that I know about do not pay attention to those aspects enough. They do not pay enough attention to those aspects.
And Meg, you also raised a point about, which really good point about functional organizations and silos. Disasters don't know your organization chart or don't care, right? So that's why since disasters are multidisciplinary, that's why your simulation teams have to be multidisciplinary as well.
Great. So, so there was a question that came up about running regular catastrophic tests. So I would say that's what we call a simulation, right? How often do you think those types of simulations should be run?
I'll just start. Let the system tell you. So if you're asking that question, you probably need to run one next week. And that's the signal that you need more simulations. And we call those hidden factors, and it's something we've been covering for years. You will learn that somewhere between 20 and 50% of all the activities in your company, the system doesn't really know how it works, right? At a level it needs to control risk. So my point is, as you start running these simulations, as long as you're learning about uncertainties, you need to keep doing it. And second is, when you bring new people into the company, you need to keep your organizational knowledge going. So that would be my response.
And it's very tempting to seek for a silver bullet. Oh, how frequently? I think that unfortunately the answer is a little bit more complex. And I don't think when we say simulations, I don't think that it's necessarily like an event when you actually simulate something like a computer. Like it could be that as well. I think that this is something that you need to think strategically and design it from the day-to-day questions that you ask, the monthly questions that you ask, to the quarterly questions that you ask, to the yearly. So and it's really about awareness and creating. And again, John's point, I cannot emphasize it more, that it starts by knowing your system, right? Like, if you don't know your system, what are you going to simulate, right? Like, you can simulate something that is not even relevant to your system, right? And have different assumptions that don't even hold true. So to me, it starts with structured ways that start with structured processes, but also with structured behaviors and disciplined behavior of asking questions that will allow you to understand your system and then understand the boundaries of your system. And then you are in a position to start asking questions. Okay, what happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? So you can start now building scenarios. And some companies can do that with some what we call a red team that will sort of challenge the organization with scenarios and disruptions, and then really ask about for each disruption you may want to ask yourself two questions, right? The first of which is how long I can survive under this disruption, right? Like, how long I will continue to operate with no major degradation given this disruption, right? So for example, this supplier is gone, right? I have inventory for 3 months. So for the next 3 months, I can still operate. But after that, I have a problem, right? The second question that you want to ask about the disruption is how quickly I'm able to remove it and sort of, find an alternative. So if it's a supplier, find an alternative supplier or recover this supplier and so forth. And again, this goes back to asking the right questions, right? Mm-hmm. And now you start to get answers or estimates, and now there will be things that will emerge, weaknesses that you were not aware that will emerge, and now you can actually estimate the exposure. What's going to be the exposure if I'm not going to recover fast enough and I'm not going to survive before I recover, then now I have an exposure. Now I can estimate it, and I can think about what can I do to increase my time to survive, how long I can survive, or how quickly I can recover, right? So this is a very, and we're going to talk about how to we're going to make it more precise during the course, but these are the kind of questions that you start asking yourself at the individual level as a manager, then groups, and then throughout the organizations. You need to create a process throughout the entire enterprise that asks these questions and get experts and data to give you answers that will allow you to see weaknesses in advance and decide what you want to do about them.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could just add to Retsef points, I work with all our maintenance teams and watch maintenance. And I want to give you, so what I want to get the point across is every time your team does something in operations, it's a simulation of how it will perform in a crisis. So imagine, this is a real example, capacity. If one of those bottling lines shuts down, they're supposed to fix it in 4 hours. It took them 16. Not a problem because they have excess capacity. 6 months later, it's summer. I'm running at 90% capacity. That line shuts down. I lose 2 days. I lose half a day of production. And they actually knew that 6 months ago and they ignored it. So every time your company's doing an operational changeover or they're doing a maintenance changeover, that's actually like a free experiment in scenario planning and how your system can respond. Yeah. So get down on the floor and watch.
Yeah, and going back to something that we talked about, every time you have a near miss, every time you debrief, that's an opportunity to understand, some new things about the questions we just talked about, right? Like, here's a new disruption we didn't think about. Here's a new weakness that we didn't think about. So I think this is not something that is confined to one point in time or to one activity. This has to be immersed into everything that you do and how you think about decision making.
Yeah. So would you say that's like having a culture of a test and learn approach?
Yeah, and really think about these things as part of your decision making. This is not an aftermath. You cannot just, I'm making all of these decisions, then I will let someone else analyzing the risk. This is why when I hear about organizations that have very large risk units or safety units, I'm getting very, very nervous because usually these units are being perceived by the business as, these are the people that disrupt us, they don't allow us to actually do what we need to do, right? And that's kind of exactly counter to what we discussed so far. This has to be owned by the business leaders, because they are going to be affected by this, and they are closest to the risk. They are closest to what drives the risk as well, right? So I think that this has to do with culture, processes, questions you ask and how you make decisions throughout the organization, and really inject to it in a very structured way the right set of questions, and ask for the right data and then act on it. Because otherwise, it's not going to be very effective.
And just a question of how, leadership can prep staff for vigilance. The most dangerous part is, as a leader, when you change your behavior, you're going to be overwhelmed with all the things that are going wrong and can be dealt with. So you need to enlist a great deal of the front line to help fix these small problems. And second, make sure your people have the tools they need to do their job. When I go and talk on the front line, and this is also in software companies and knowledge work as well as operations, what do you have when you start a job? Do you have what you need? And they say about 50% of the time. So how can they be resilient in their during an incident when they barely have what they need to do their daily job? So getting there, talking to the people on the ground, and then actually be willing to make improvements is critical.
So we do have one fairly specific question here in the chat, Retsef, for you about supply chain. And how do you get in touch with what's going on 3 to 4 levels into the supply chain?
Well, first you start asking your suppliers, who are their suppliers? You go and see, and and then you go to the other suppliers, and you just invest in this. These companies have very rigorous organizations that go and really validate the integrity of their suppliers, but also don't think about it as a adversarial relationship, right? If you're going to have adversarial relationships with your suppliers, you're probably not going to be told what the problems are in a timely manner, right? And there are examples of companies that are able to really use as a major feature of resilience their supply chain relationships, right? Because if you think about your personal life, right, when there is a crisis, this is where the people that are close to you, the people that you have relationships with, that you go back and you have some common experience, and you've been used to work with, with the trusted relationships. These are the people that you're gonna prefer to work with to actually get yourself out of trouble, right? And the same principles, I believe, hold when you think about your supply chain partners, right? If you're going to think about it adversarially and transactionally, it's not going to be an asset. In fact, it might be actually a liability, right? Because they're going to do whatever they can not to actually tell you what is happening, because they're going to be afraid of your reaction. But if you're going to develop long-term relationships and really kind of trusted relationships, then you have a much better chance that once something will disrupt the supply chain, you're going to be able to collectively, with your suppliers, find quickly good solutions. And I think that's kind of, culturally, this is something very common in Asia, in Japanese companies like Toyota and other companies. And many people from the West always tell me, "Oh, that can only work in Asia. In the US, in the West, it doesn't work out." I beg to differ, and I think that's something that I think is under, it's missed by many companies. This opportunity to build this trusted relationship, and by the way, it's with the suppliers in the supply chain, but also within the organization. This can be an asset. This is another dimension of resilience that I think companies may not appreciate.
Yeah. So it again and again, we're hearing the transparency, the collaboration, the relationships across different parts of the organization. So, and fostering those as well with suppliers and other types of partners that maybe more traditionally in business we thought of as not kind of part of the core. What about I lost my train of thought. So, well, let's see, we're about 5 minutes left here. And I want to give you both, John and Retsef, a chance as we close out to think about, if you were to give one takeaway, one thing that you would share with the audience to help them in this area, what would it be?
John.
Oh, so I would just first start out is I didn't want to, we gave you a lot of things to do to scare you, but the good news is your company wastes so much time that you can use that to do all these things, like go out to see your suppliers, and then you won't have to firefight your own factory. That's part of the leverage that's key. And the second point I'd just like to leave is read the newspapers and look for all these events of catastrophes, and then read the fine print to say where someone knew it actually got to leadership. So those would be the two things I'd want to remember. Particularly, read the paper and look for leading indicators that were ignored by big companies, and realize, yes, we did have the power to do something.
Yeah. So as a leadership team, don't be allergic to bad news.
Unfortunately,
right?
yeah.
Got it. Retsef?
Yeah, the way I'm thinking about the risk management, the risk is, it's really the ability of the organization to understand and mitigate the sources of uncertainty that it has, both internally and externally, and how it relates to how the system is designed and operates. And one of the things that you need to really understand when you think about the sources of uncertainty is, often many things that are uncertain are not really uncertain because they're just uncertain to you. But frankly speaking, if you had the right listening, the right system, the right processes, the right sensing, and the right mental models, you're actually you're going to actually be able to know these things, and it's not going to be that uncertain. But some are objectively uncertain, and that's part of the ability to succeed. It's not only a risk; it's a negative risk. It's also a positive risk, right? And to me, this is really the ability of companies to manage risk. Now, resilience is an extreme aspect of that, because it really talks about things that really disrupt in a very infrequent way. So you don't have like other sources of uncertainty that maybe are very frequent. You face them every day or every month. Like, let's just take an airline company. Weather uncertainty, that's something that the airline company is facing on a daily basis, and that's something that they have a lot of experience, because they get a lot of ability to actually see what works and what doesn't work. The issue of resilience is really about the things that you haven't seen yet, and that's kind of what makes it, or it's very infrequent, or very unlikely that you can see. But unlikely also happens sometimes, and as we definitely saw in the last 3 years, right? So to me, that's kind of maybe one of the most challenging aspects of risk management, where really what is really critical is the ability to understand the boundaries of your system, and kind of what are the enabling conditions of your system, because otherwise you're almost managing things blinded.
Wonderful.
And we just like to encourage, and also, we spend so much time in meetings talking about productivity and how much time in our organization we step outside and talk about risk and resilience. So carve some time out, and also learn from your colleagues. And of course, if you'd like, you can join us next month, where we'll be offering our course. So that would be a great opportunity to carve out some time with yourselves and speak with your colleagues in different industries that have the same challenges as you do, and opportunities.
Thanks, John, for mentioning that. As I mentioned at the start of our time together today, we have a course called Building Organizational Resilience: A Systems Approach to Mitigating Risk and Uncertainty. And we've been getting great feedback from folks who have participated in this course, that they've been able to go away and use what they've learned in the course to have real impact in their businesses. So we're excited about it. We could talk about it for another 2 hours, but we're not going to do that. Retsef is it's late in the evening where he is, so we'll wrap it up. But thank you all so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks, John and Retsef. Pleasure to spend time with you. And we wish you all well. And once again, happy Valentine's Day. Take care.
Good
Thanks, everybody.
evening, everybody.